Hi, welcome to another geopolitical analysis video. I'd like to start off by thanking you for your support and your reactions to my debut video here on YouTube on the topic of Turkish invasion in Syria, where we discussed about the atrocities done by Turkey in that region and also the insidious workings of Sadat, but also the redistribution of energy resources in that region of the Middle East. Now, this video will provide a link to the aforementioned and will be used as a guideline to understand what is slowly unfolding. Before I dive into the topic though, I'd like to explain to you the reason why I created this channel. Just to give you some background on myself, I've served in the special forces and also served in the maritime industry. And I had the fortune to work with some people who were either officers in their national army and moved on to private military or security, but also traveled to more than 25 countries and a lot of war-ridden and filled with rift regions, just like Somalia. And that has given me a first-hand experience in a lot of these topics that we see right now are unfolding in the world. So that has shaped my worldview, but also has given me an interest to lucidly explain some of these long-standing issues that are threatening world peace. So before I dive into this topic, I'd like to also explain to you that the links and the sources that I'm using are from many places of the world. As you can see, some of them have been translated from other languages. But the main and most important thing is that I'm using sources from different regions of the world and using different journalists, a lot of them who are locals and a lot of them who are international. So just to get into the video, thanks so much for the intro. I'd like to discuss about the U.S. State Department's recent report of 2019. The acronym, of course, is USCIRF. Now, when it was published, one of the things that really stood out were a lot of these countries that have been dealing with internal issues, but also have been oppressing a lot of minorities and ethnic groups, had a lot of common, if you will, means and techniques of doing so. And I found it very interesting. It's a very long report, but overall, one of the things that it concluded was that the Turkish government continues to discriminate the Alawite minorities and also intervenes in the affairs of other ethnicities within Turkey and also outside Turkey. So the report has said that the U.S. government should urge the Turkish government to fully comply with the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights and freedom of religion or belief. Also, the U.S. should press the Turkish government to rationalize measures that would allow non-Sunni Muslim communities to apply for state funding to support the construction and maintenance of their places of worship. Also, they should urge the Turkish government to ensure that the curriculum remains comprehensive to all religious groups in Turkey, as well as reprimand public government officers or officials who make anti-Semitic or other derogatory statements about religious communities in Turkey. Now, something that came across to my research was that in January 2007, there was a Turkish Armenian journalist who was very prominent called Dink. He was assassinated on a busy street of Istanbul by a young Turkish nationalist. 3 months later, there were 5 young Muslim Turks who murdered 3 Christian workers, one who was of German descent and the other 2 who were Turkish, at the USCIRF publishing house for their Christian missionary activities, including distributors of copies of the Bible. Now, Christians were brutally murdered because their activities were regarded as a means of proselytizing to the Turkish Muslims and were therefore enemies of Turkey. Also, some of the rates that I've come across after a survey that was published by the University of Istanbul in 2018 indicate that only 8.2% of Turks would be happy if there was a Armenian neighbor, and only 10.2% will feel comfortable with a Greek Orthodox Christian neighbor. However, a secular state does not have the luxury to like or dislike religious beliefs of citizens. And if we look at the article of the Turkish constitution, it makes it clear that everyone is equal before the law, regardless of language, race, sex, color, or political beliefs, philosophy, religion, dogma, etc. So why is this not really the blueprint of the Turkish society? Why isn't this adhered to if it's part of the constitution? I mean, a century ago, Christians really made up 20% or more Turkish population. And today it's actually less than 0.5%. So the Turkish culture really fears the handful of fellow citizens from a different region or belief. And it's something that really worries the international society in community, because the trajectory of Turkey has really indicated that it's increasing the demonization and smear campaign by government entities or even pro-government media who are contributing to this growing climate of fear among religious minority communities. Finally, the unjust detainment and trial of Protestant pastor Andrew Brunson was an ordeal that lasted for, I believe it was more than 2 years, and it really gave rise to hate crimes and hate speech against Christians. There was conclusion that in October 2018, there was an immediate release. However, there was significant pressure from the U.S. government in order for that to happen. In this report, the U.S. State of Department states that it will continue to monitor religious freedom conditions to determine whether developments worsen and warrant a change in the country's status during the year ahead. Now, aside from the cultural and religious oppressive behavior of that country, there's been an economic red flags from the FATF, which is the Financial Action Task Force, which has reported that Turkey is not doing anything to cut terrorist fundings and supplying of weapons of mass destruction to different regions of the world. Therefore, it had been added into a gray list by the FATF, indicating that this country is really continuing the actions of supporting ISIS, for instance, supporting terrorist groups around the world, and also systematically trying to undermine different countries of opposite belief or, let's say, ethnicity. So we know that Turkey is disregarding human rights, is systematically stepping on the freedoms of minorities. But if that is not enough, Turkey has been spotted supplying weapons and oil to terrorist organizations, like I said, ISIS, but also freeing those fighters after they've been captured. Now, we know from China to Africa, Turkey has been meddling with socio-political affairs to create destabilization and extremism, from the funding and smuggling weapons of Boko Haram to Libya, which recently really has been the forefront of a lot of news reports and a lot of news media. Turkey has been captured for sending different terrorist organizations in Libya, sending weapons to cripple the regime of Haftar, the General Haftar, and there's also a lot of talk of what is going on in the Middle East with ISIS, but also we know years before the incidents with Egypt, when it was trying to destabilize the government with different smear campaigns and also funding of opposition groups. So also something that may not really be familiar to the Western media, but Turkey is supporting the oppression of the Uighurs, who are a Turkic minority population in China, as they were in the 90s especially involved in different terrorist attacks in China. And we know that Turkey has been using these minorities to create extremist groups to affect the Chinese government. There are ultimately Machiavellian techniques which really leverage the influence in countries for economic and strategic gain. Although Turkey has published concerns and reports about the improper how would we call this? Just improper use of violence, I guess, from the Chinese government, but also it has been blackmailing these countries and undermining them for Turkey's own political gain. So these are different genocide-like actions in Syria against the Kurds and other minorities in the Middle East that I discussed in my previous video. But it is very alarming because we've seen this since the days of the Ottoman Empire, and these techniques have not changed. So where is the international mechanism? I mean, I did mention the State Department of the US, also the European Court has stepped in to mention these issues, but nothing has been really done here. You know, there seems that there's no justice and there's no boycott to limit these illegal activities. I mean, why do we need to sit back and watch these criminalities happen to begin with? How hypocritical is it that the European countries are condemning Turkey, but simultaneously are selling arms and artillery to Turkey, just like Germany and the US? As you can see in the picture, these are all equipment that have been sent by the US and Germany to Turkey after successful agreements of, you know, millions and millions of dollars. It seems that, you know, again, Turkey is continuing the Ottoman Empire's atrocities and systematic genocide against religious and ethnic minorities within its region, but also outside, which is alarming because it's undermining countries and using its own Turkic minorities to pursue political gain. Let us hope and pray for those who are persecuted from Turkey that this will not continue and that Erdogan's establishment fails ultimately to create destabilization and extremism. Thank you for watching. Please stay tuned as I have another video coming up on the connection of Turkey and the dangerous weaponization of Islam, and also the Islamic Economic Union that we're not told about. Thanks so much.